grab yourself a coffee and pull up a seat because today I'm teaching you how to play A Place for All My Books from Smirk and Dagger Games. I'm Mark Maya, and this is Board Game Coffee.
Vincent, get back here this instant!
Thank you. Oh, I love you too. I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you. Thank you.
A Place for All My Books is a cozy little worker placement pattern building game where players stack books in different configurations in order to score personal projects. The game takes place in 2 locations. Your apartment, where you'll arrange and rearrange an ever-growing collection of books to maximize your point-scoring potential and recharge your social battery. And the local village, to spend that stored-up energy and acquire more books and other personal items to improve your game. A Place for All My Books can be played 1 to 4 players. In this video, I'll be focusing on the rules for a 2-player game, although I will go over the differences for a 3 and 4-player game along the way. If you're looking to play a solo game, you can find the rules for that in the back of the rulebook. With that said, let's get to the setup. For our 2-player game, place the village mat in the center of the table with the 1 to 3 player side face up, as indicated here in the lower right corner. If playing with 4 players, you would set the board to the other side. Next, place the sun token on the sun track according to the number of players. Gather the 4 lucky cat tokens, 2 wild books, the lamp token, and this bookend token, and place them near the village mat. You'll only need these special tokens and books if a card in the game calls for them. So it's quite possible you'll play through a whole game and never use anything here. Next, place all your yellow, green, red, and blue book tokens in the provided bag, and give them a good shake. Once that's done, draw books randomly from the bag and place them above these shelf slots. 3 books on the first shelf, 2 books on the second shelf, and 1 book on the third shelf. Now, shuffle up all the little project cards, place them face down near the village mat, and deal 1 card face up above each shelf space. Next, shuffle the other neat stuff cards, place them face down near the village mat, and deal 2 cards face up like so. These are your major accomplishment cards. Shuffle them up, deal 3 face up near the village mat, and place the remaining cards back in the box. Now that the shared elements are ready to go, let's set up our personal player area. Each player should select a player mat, place it in front of them, and gather the following components: 1 player card that matches the mat you selected, a meeple and social battery token of the same color, and 3 major accomplishment tokens with your character's face on it. Next, collect the specific books indicated here on your player mat. For our green player, we'll need 4 green books, 3 blue books, 3 yellow books, and 2 red books. Once you've collected your starting books, mix them up in your hand and stack them randomly on the spaces indicated with these dots. The number of dots indicates how many books are placed in that space. So for our green player, we would place 3 books here, 2 here, 4 books here, and 3 here. Next, deal 5 little project cards to each player. Then, each player selects 3 cards to keep and discards the others to a face-up discard pile. Now we need to determine player order. The person who acquired a new book most recently in real life will be the first player. Give them this first player token as a reminder. The last thing we need to do is set our social battery level. The first player sets their social battery to 3, and the second player sets their social battery to 4. If we were playing with 3 or 4 players, then the next player would set their social battery level to 5 and 6 respectively. Now that we're all set up, let's learn how to play. A Place for All My Books is played in clockwise order around the table, starting with the first player. On your turn, you'll place your meeple in one of these action spaces on your player mat and perform the action listed. Then play passes on to the next player. At first, you'll only have access to the action spaces on your player mat, also known as your apartment. But once you charge up your social battery, you'll be able to leave the house and perform actions in the village. Your goal in A Place for All My Books is to score more points than all the other players by the end of the game. You do that by completing little projects, collecting other neat stuff, scoring major objectives, and by simply having books in your apartment. The end of the game is triggered when this sun token reaches the last slot on its track. But we'll get into more details about that later in the video. On your first turn of the game, you can place your meeple on any of these spaces in your apartment and perform the action listed. This action here requires you to spend 5 social battery points to perform, which neither I nor the other player have, so currently that's not an option. An important thing to note is that most of the action spaces in your apartment will fill your social battery when performed, while most of the action spaces in the village will deplete your social battery. Which means there's going to be a lot of back and forth. Head to the village to spend the energy you saved up, then head back home to rejuvenate your social battery. Now, when selecting an action space, there are a few rules you need to follow. Rule number 1. When your turn starts, you must always move your meeple to a different action space first. Then perform the action of the space you moved to. Now, if you notice on the 4-player side of the village mat, the used bookstore action has 2 spaces to hold meeples. This does not mean you can move from one space to the other. This is all the same action, so regardless of what space you're on, you gotta go somewhere else. You ain't gotta go home, but you can't stay here. Each action space, except for the Admire action, will have either a green circle with an up arrow or a down arrow. An up arrow simply means that you gain the indicated amount of social battery, and the down arrow means that you lose the indicated amount. Any social battery that you lose or gain is tracked here on your social battery track. Now, there are 2 important things to remember about your social battery. 1. You can never gain more than 20 social battery. And 2. You can't enter an action space if you can't afford to lose the amount indicated. And lastly, while in the village, you are allowed to place your meeple on a space occupied by another player. When you do this, push the other player's meeple to the park where they will gain 2 social battery. Now, it's very important to note that you can't just decide to go to the park. It's not an action you can voluntarily select. The only way to enter the park is if your meeple is pushed off the village action by another player, or if a card tells you to. Alright, now that you know how to take an action, let's learn what they do. When you take the Gather action, increase your social battery by 1. Then take the top book from up to 6 different book stacks in your apartment and place them on either an empty space or on top of another stack. The books you gathered can be reorganized before they're placed, but you cannot change the order of any books in the stack you place them on. And when placing the books you gathered, you cannot divide them among multiple spaces. Another rule to keep in mind as we go forward is that a stack can consist of 1 to 6 books. No more. 6 is the maximum height of a stack. Taking the Sort action will also increase your social battery by 1. The Sort action allows you to pick up an entire stack of books and distribute them in any order to any empty space or existing stack of books. The only limitation is that you cannot add more than 2 books to each stack or empty space. And don't forget, just like we mentioned in the Gather action, a stack can only have a maximum of 6 books. The Read a Book action will gain you 2 social battery and allow you to take one book from anywhere in your apartment and place it on your nightstand. In addition to being another space in your apartment, the books on your nightstand can be exchanged for books of another color when you visit the village. But we'll cover that a little later in the video. The admire action is your primary method of earning points. But to understand how this action works, we need to talk about these little project cards that you were dealt at the start of the game. Think of your little projects as organizational challenges. Basically, if the pattern depicted on one of these cards appears in your apartment, you can score that card. Let me take you through a few examples. This card requires that you have a stack of books consisting of at least 2 blue books and 2 red books. And as indicated here, the books can be stacked in any order. This little project here requires that you have 3 tall stacks with no yellow books. When a card refers to a tall stack, it means any stack consisting of 3 or more books, which you'll be reminded of at the bottom of the card. This last example requires that you have a room where all of its spaces are filled by lonesome books. Now, you might have not noticed this, but your apartment is broken up into rooms separated by color. The kitchen, bath, den, and your bedroom, where you'll find the nightstand space. Now, just to clarify, a book on its own, like this, counts as both a lonesome book and a stack. Alright, now that we have all that cleared up, let's head back to the admire action. When you take the admire action, you can score 1 or more of your little projects and gain the rewards listed here. These stars are victory points that you earn at the end of the game, and these social battery points are something that you earn right away. Sometimes, instead of social battery points, your reward will show this little shopping bag. When you complete a little project with this icon, instead of increasing your social battery, take the top card from the Other Neat Stuff deck and place it face up near your apartment mat. We'll talk about what these do later. Before you collect any rewards, double check that the pattern required by your little project actually appears in your apartment. Once you've confirmed the pattern, collect the reward listed here. Then slide the little project card underneath your player card. You'll need it later for end of game scoring. While taking the admire action, there's no limit to how many little projects you can complete. So if all 3 of these patterns appear in my apartment, I can complete all of them on a single turn. Oh, and one additional thing. Each time you take the admire action, check your player card. It will award you a bonus of 3 social battery points if the indicated color is the most common book in your apartment. For example, if we look at our player card, we can see that our character prefers green books. So if green is the most common book in our apartment, which it is, we increase our social battery by 3. By taking the rest action, you gain the top 2 cards from the Little Projects deck and gain 2 social battery. The maximum amount of little project cards you can have in your hand is 5, so any cards you have in excess of that must be discarded until you only have 5 cards in your hand. The last apartment action we're going to cover is the Leave the House action. This is the only action in your apartment that will cost you social battery to perform. When you take the Leave the House action, reduce your social battery by 5. Advance the Sun Tracker 1 space, and immediately place your meeple on one of these village action spaces and perform the action listed. Now, keep in mind, the 5 social battery you paid will only get you out of the house. You'll still need enough social battery left over to pay for the action you want to perform in the village. So make sure you got enough battery charged up before you leave. It's recommended that you save up anywhere from 13 to 20 social battery before you leave the house. This way, you'll be able to perform a few actions in the village before you have to return home and recharge. Alright, now that we've covered everything you can do in your apartment, let's learn about the village actions. When you take the Used Bookstore action, you can buy all the books on one of these shelves. The cost of buying these books will depend on what pile you take. The smallest pile, that's this one with the least amount of books, will cost you 1 social battery. The medium pile will cost you 3, and the largest pile, the one with the most amount of books, will cost you 6 social battery. In addition to taking the books, you'll also gain the little project card located above that shelf. And remember, if you ever have more than 5 little project cards in your hand, you'll have to discard down to 5. The books you collect will be placed in your backpack. You can stack them in any order you want in these 2 spaces. But once placed, they cannot be rearranged, so place wisely. If you already had books in your backpack, then you would simply place your new books on top of the ones already there. Keep in mind that the stack limit in your backpack is the same as your apartment, so you can't have more than 6 books stacked in each of these backpack spaces. Once you've collected your books and little project card, refill the area with a new card from the top of the little project's deck and 3 random books from the bag, placing 1 randomly in each of the shelf spaces. This way, you'll always have a shelf with the smallest, medium, and largest amount of books. Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to show you the Used Bookstore section on the 4-player side of the Village mat. Notice that on this side, the Used Bookstore has 2 spaces. The space you select will determine which shelf you can purchase books from. This space will allow you to buy books from one of these 2 shelves, while this space here will allow you to buy books from one of these 2 shelves. Now, as we mentioned earlier, players can't just bounce back from one space to the next. So, if you start your turn in the Used Bookstore, you're going to have to go somewhere else. Another thing to note about the 4-player version of the Used Bookstore is that you can only get pushed out to the park if another player enters the space you're in specifically. So if you're here and they go here, you do not get pushed to the park. When you take the library action, reduce your social battery by 1 and draw 4 books randomly from the bag. Keep 1 of them to place in your backpack, then deal 1 randomly to each shelf. When you take the exchange action, reduce your social battery by 1. The exchange action allows you to take any number of books from your nightstand, return them to the bag, then take back an equal amount plus 1 extra book. And the best part is, you select the color or colors that you want. And just like the other actions, any books you get from the exchange are placed in your backpack. The village shop is probably my favorite action to take, because that's where you get to buy all this cool stuff. Or, to be specific, all this other neat stuff. The village shop action allows you to buy items from this collection of cards here entitled Other Neat Stuff. To buy one of these face-up cards, it'll cost you 4 social battery. If you want to buy both of them, it'll cost you 9 social battery. You also have the option of paying 3 social battery and taking the top card of the deck. Now, whichever option you choose, there are a few things that happen. First off, the card or cards you buy should be placed face up near your player mat. Then reset the supply with 2 new cards from the top of the deck. Even if you didn't buy both face up cards, discard the one you didn't buy and place 2 new ones. Now, if you chose the blind option, just take the top card of the deck. There's no need to reset the supply. And keep in mind, each time you visit the shops, you can only perform one of these actions. You can't buy a face-up card and a card from the top of the deck on the same turn. The Other Neat Stuff cards will earn you points at the end of the game, and offer up some pretty cool rule-breaking abilities to help you earn even more points. Let's take a closer look. This number in the star represents how many points this card will earn you at the end of the game. This bar here lets you know when the card's ability can be triggered. and the text below that is the card's ability. Some cards will also have this when acquired ability. This ability will be clearly indicated and only happens once when the card is acquired. There are too many other neat stuff cards to cover in this video, but what they do is clearly written on each of them. Let's go over a few examples. This decorative mug says, each time you gather, you may discard one little project card to immediately sort. Now, the ability to do 2 actions in one turn is pretty powerful, even if it costs you a project card. And keep in mind, once you purchase this card and add it to your play area, this option is available to you each time you perform the gather action. But that's not always the case. Items like this leather journal are a single-use item. In this case specifically, you can trigger this card's ability anytime during your turn, allowing you to immediately perform an admire action from anywhere, even if you're not at home. Once you've used a card's ability, flip it over to show it's been used. You won't be able to use it again this game. Some other neat stuff cards won't do anything until the end of the game, like this night lamp that scores you 1 point for each different color book on your nightstand, which is in addition to the 2 points it already awards you. And lastly, some cards, like this Lucky Kitty and Fancy Bookends, require that you use these special tokens that we set aside during the setup. Which cards need tokens and how they're used will be described on the card itself. If you remember, we covered this area at the top of the video. The town park is not an action you can voluntarily take. The only way to get your meeple on one of these benches is if you're pushed out of an action by another player. Once you enter the town park, you'll earn 2 social battery, which you can spend on your next turn. Once you've performed all the actions you want to do or can afford to do in the village, it's time to go home. Unlike leaving the house, there's no cost for returning home. When you return home, place your meeple on this space here. Then unload the books in your backpack without changing their order or dividing the stack in any way. Place each stack onto a space in your apartment. You can place them in an empty space or on top of another stack, keeping in mind that you can't exceed 6 books in one stack. Once you've placed your books, move your meeple to an action space and perform that action. These 3 cards here are your major accomplishments. They work much like little project cards that are available to everyone, except you don't need to take an admire action to score a major accomplishment. If during your turn you meet the requirements of a major accomplishment, place your major accomplishment token next to the first place marker of the card you accomplished, and immediately earn the rewards listed here. The points listed on the card will be awarded at the end of the game. If someone already has their token on the first place location, place your token on the second place location and earn the rewards listed here. There is no limit to how many players can earn this second place reward. Although, if you have already scored a major accomplishment card, you can't score it again. As mentioned earlier, each time a player takes the Leave the House action and visits the village, advance the Sun Tracker 1 space. When the Sun Tracker reaches this final space here, finish the current round so that each player gets an equal amount of turns, then play 1 additional round. Once you've done that, we move on to final scoring. Each player should tally up all the points that they've earned. Gain 1 point for each book in your apartment, add up all the points indicated on the little projects that you've completed, and all the points listed on the other neat stuff cards that you've purchased. Then add on any major accomplishment points that you may have earned. And lastly, gain 1 VP for every 4 social battery you have remaining. In case of a tie, the tied player with the most books wins. If there's still a tie, then those players share the victory. Congratulations, you've earned it. And that's it. I hope this video helps, and I hope you enjoy playing A Place for All My Books. See you next week. Thanks for joining us. If you like this video and you want to see more, subscribe to our channel. It's the best way to keep up to date with everything we do here at Board Game Coffee. But if you want to see more right now, we got plenty of videos to choose from. And if that's not enough, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm Mark Maya, and this is Board Game Coffee. And remember, have fun, keep gaming, be social. See you next week.